Every fall, millions of students pack their bags and head off to college for the very first time. And of this number, less than 2% will end up at what we call highly selective colleges and universities. And despite the fact that they represent so few students, highly selective schools continue to consume a disproportionately large amount of our thoughts, time, and energy discussions as a society. I'm Tom Campbell, former highly selective admission officer from Pomona College and College of the Holy Cross. And in this video, I want to answer some of the most common questions about highly selective schools. Questions like, what even are these schools? What does their admission process actually look like behind the scenes? And perhaps the elephant in the room for some, how do I improve my chances of attending one? If that sounds like you, stay tuned for answers to these questions and lots more. All right, our first question is an important one. What does highly selective actually mean? Lots of people will have different definitions for this, but from my experience, I like to think that highly selective schools are ones that generally accept less than 30% of applicants. This is typically the tipping point when a school can be more choosy with their applicant pool, and institutional priorities can take a much more active role in the selection process. Side note, not sure what institutional priorities are? More on those in a minute. In addition to the lower than average acceptance rates, most highly selective schools also meet the following criteria. They generally practice holistic review, meaning that they consider all aspects of the application. They tend to be very generous with meeting financial needs, and they are often seen as one-way tickets to success, though the reality is much more complicated. In total, highly selective schools represent about 2% of all U.S. colleges. Out of roughly 2,800 four-year colleges, about 65 are considered highly selective, and that number is increasing each year. Why is that? Cue question number 2. How has the selective admission process changed over the years? A quick glance at charts like this will show that a lot has changed over the past decade. Schools like University of Chicago, Vanderbilt, and Johns Hopkins should no longer be considered backups to places like the Ivies, which have long been thought of as the most elite and selective cohorts of schools in the US. These days, a lot of these schools have similar acceptance rates and similar levels of difficulty of being admitted, Ivy League or not. So why are more and more schools becoming highly selective? Again, the answer is complex, but here's a Cliff Notes version, if that's even still a thing, highlighting some of the recent trends. All right, trend number 1, the college-bound population is increasing in the United States. Today, there are nearly 4 million more students enrolling in U.S. universities when compared to 2000. According to data from the Common App, which is used by over 1,000 U.S. colleges, the number of applications for the 2024 fall semester was up 6% from the previous year alone. Trend number 2, it's never been easier to apply to colleges. With the introduction of the Common App in 1975 and more schools becoming member institutions, applying to multiple schools has never been easier because all you really have to do is fill out one default application and choose the schools you want to apply to. So today, not only are more students applying, but many are applying to more schools. Now, are there any commonalities among the students who are applying to highly selective colleges at higher volumes? Overall, most students still submit less than 5 applications total, but some of the attributes among high volume submitters, which would be students who apply to more than 15 schools, are those who attend a private high school, those who scored above a 1500 on the SAT or a 34 on the ACT, those who apply early decision to at least one college, and international students who face stiffer competition than domestic students in most colleges' admission process. Now, trend number 3 would be more homogeneous college preferences among today's college-going students. Colleges in the US, including highly selective schools, come in all shapes and sizes. But increasingly, more and more students are convinced that schools that are larger, schools that have robust STEM programs, and schools that are in urban areas are more attractive. So places like Georgia Tech or Boston University, which about a decade ago had acceptance rates hovering around 60%, are both now under 20% in less than 10 years alone. A similar story can be said for places like Boston College or Emory University. Other trends are impacting not only the enrollment numbers, but also the demographics of who is applying and getting accepted to highly selective schools. Some of these trends include policy and political changes that influence international student enrollment, the recent Supreme Court decision on race-conscious admission, recent challenges to legacy admission in some states like California, and the ever-changing policies around test optional practices. As these trends continue to shape and mold the habits of college applicants, there's bound to be some effects on the admission practices of the most selective schools. So let's turn our attention to question number 3. What exactly are these highly selective schools looking for in applicants? Now, to better understand the seemingly mysterious decisions at highly selective schools, it's helpful to draw an analogy between the admission process and the building process. Early on, admission teams are like architecture firms, tasked with creating a building plan for the perfect class village. And that plan starts with an academic foundation. This foundation is grounded in numbers. your GPA, the solid academic courses that you've taken in high school. So typically this is 4 years of English, math, science, social studies, and a language, the total number of advanced courses you've taken advantage of, and perhaps your test scores. Now keep in mind that these colleges are evaluating you with your high school's context and curriculum in mind, meaning that if you attend a school with limited or no AP classes, you're not at a disadvantage. The real question admission officers are asking themselves are, what did the student take advantage of at their school, and what did they leave on the table? In our analogy, having a strong academic foundation will make you eligible for a plot of land in this class village. You're not yet in the building plans, but you're getting closer. To see if you would be eligible at a plot of land at a college that you're interested in, you should definitely check out their common data set. These handy documents provide all sorts of valuable information about the typical applicant at an individual school, as well as what the college is specifically focusing on in their selection process. Pro tip, you can find that at section C7. If you're well outside the typical academic profile, you're probably outside of that school's building plans too. And no, it's very, very unlikely for you to write an essay or load up on shiny extracurriculars to make up for that. It's important to remember that the vast majority of applicants are eligible for a plot of land based on their academics alone, around 70 to 80% of the total applicant pool at most highly selective colleges. Take Harvard, for instance. Out of Harvard's 40,000 plus applications in 2020, 8,000 had perfect GPAs based on their own high school's grading scale, 3,400 had perfect math SAT scores, 2,700 had perfect SAT verbal scores, and in the end, 2,000 students are admitted each year. So yes, having an incredibly strong academic foundation makes you buildable, but it's nowhere near a guarantee. All right, with the land situation figured out, the architects move on to the next phase, determining what to build. And there are two major factors that guide this process. The first factor is what we in the biz call institutional priorities. Let's compare these to building codes. Like building codes, they can vary from place to place and college to college. And these tend to be things that are outside of a student's control. Things like how a school feels about legacy applicants, if a school values first generation to college students, if a school is looking to boost their fine arts or athletic programs, or get more students from the Midwest, or even if a school just needs a new tuba player in their marching band or orchestra. All of these would be considered institutional priorities, and they help define the parameters of what that class village needs to look like in any given year, based on directives from the school's client, which would be their college leadership, president and their board of trustees. Now, side note, whenever I mention institutional priorities to students and families, the most common follow-up question that I get is, how do I find out these secret codes? And the answer is, unfortunately, you probably can't. Colleges often keep these under lock and key because they worry about savvy students and families crafting inauthentic applications to try to meet their priorities. Plus, these priorities shift every single cycle and are entirely dependent on initiatives and areas of growth set by the college's leadership, which they refine and change their stance on every single year. So mapping out an entire high school plan to meet one school's priorities as a ninth grader doesn't necessarily mean that they're looking for the same attributes and experiences when you apply 4 years later. Now, some schools are more transparent about pressing institutional priorities, more than others. So take, for instance, University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign, or UIUC, which had an overall acceptance rate of 42.4% in 2024. On their website, they make it clear that some of their majors and programs are a higher priority than others for them, while a small handful of popular programs, like their G's School of Business, which has a 23% admit rate, and the Granger College of Engineering, which also has a 24% admit rate, are flooded with interested applicants and they simply cannot take them all. Otherwise, they'd over-enroll and not be able to get everyone the classes that they need to graduate, and there would be lots of disharmony on campus. Side note, their computer science program alone has a staggering 7% admit rate. So the lesson here is that yes, institutional priorities, including major choice, can carry a lot of weight at many highly selective colleges and universities, or even for highly selective programs at more moderately selective colleges. How many times can I say selective in one sentence? And for the most part, you really can't control them. So what about the things that you can control? That takes us to the second factor that colleges use when determining what to build in their village, the students themselves as reflected in their holistic college application. Now, assuming that you've earned your plot of land, aka the right numbers, and you fit within the building code, aka the institutional priorities, now it's up to you to convince the architecture firm that you're made of the right stuff. You can do this by making sure you're asking the right people for your recommendation letters, i.e. the people who know you best, teach solid academic courses, and would write the best, most superlative letter, filling your activities list with extracurriculars that are self-directed, rooted in intellectual curiosity, original, impact-focused, and/or that reflect responsibility and care for your family, community, or society. And of course, there's the essays. Essays are arguably a student's best opportunity to make all those numbers come to life and convince the admission team that you share their vision and their mission and values. Most highly selective colleges will have their own supplemental extra essays that go along with that personal statement, which is that 650-word life story that's required as part of the Common App. There's a common misconception that there exists a typical student that these schools are dying to have. You know, the types that get all A's, lead student government, captain the basketball team, and tutor kids in math and science. But the reality is that the architects of this village aren't necessarily looking for the perfect, well-rounded student as much as they're looking for the perfect, well-rounded class or village. In other words, they're looking to build this more than this. To achieve this, admission teams must consider both common and uncommon building materials when mapping out their blueprints. Common building materials are high grades, near perfect test scores, students from more familiar places like cities and suburbia, interests in trending programs like STEM, leadership positions and common activities that are offered in most high schools, so things like student government, the right course catalog, strong letters of recommendation, and impressive communication skills. These are things that you'll see in many applications. But there will also be plenty of uncommon building materials that a school is sorting through. And when schools become more selective, these types of materials become more valuable as the school looks to build a singularly unique class village, set apart from other highly selective villages. These may be students who are more reflective thinkers, students who may be motivated around a cause, like a student who has strong opinions on the refugee crisis and has spent the last 3 years putting those thoughts into tangible action. Perhaps students whose demographics suggest a unique perspective, like that of a low-income, first-generation student who comes from a tiny village in Alaska, or students who have atypical extracurricular passions and show great initiative with them, like one student who created an entire podcast all about the life of ants. True story, this was an applicant to Pomona several years ago. And yes, he was admitted. So the TLDR, too long didn't read, admission officers at selective colleges are like architects who, each year, are told to create the most well-rounded, singularly unique village of high-achieving students possible, and they must work within a constantly shifting set of parameters called institutional priorities, all while using a mixture of common and uncommon building materials.
Got it?
Now, if all of this is sounding scary, I get it. This may be shocking, but I was in your shoes not too long ago. And when I was applying to college, I wish I knew about College SAI's wealth of resources available to students who are looking to build the best application possible
For college.
whether you're targeting highly selective schools or not. Check out the link below for our college application hub, which has blogs and guides on things like writing your personal statement, crafting amazing supplemental essays, building your college list, financial aid and scholarships, and much more. All right, back to the juicy, behind the scenes, behind the curtain view on these selective schools. So now that we know how admission teams think through applications, let's turn our attention to the actual building phase and answer our next question. What does the admission process look like? When a student submits their application for early decision in November or regular decision in January, what happens next? How does a school like Harvard start with 54,000 applications and end up with just under 2,000 acceptance emails? All right, here's a basic overview of the admission process, which again, will vary from college to college. At most highly selective schools, admission reviews happen and they involve multiple admission officers or readers who will typically follow a standardized rubric or blueprint to follow the analogy. Remember, rubrics vary from place to place and are reflective of each school's unique institutional priorities, mission, and design goals for the year. All right, step one is to sort the applications into geographic cues. Each admission officer is assigned a particular geographic territory and is responsible for understanding applicant history, unique curricula, grading scales, and transcripts of high schools from a particular region or state. And one key way that they do this is looking at your school's profile before diving into your transcript. So if you don't know what your school profile looks like, it's a good idea to get your hands on one earlier than later so you know how your high school is being communicated to admission officers on the other end. All right. Step two is that they read. Many selective colleges practice a reading model called CBE, or committee-based evaluation, where two admission officers read the same file at the same time, often in 10 minutes or less. The regional admission officer drives the file and is focused more on the student's academic and school context, while another admission officer acts as the passenger, or a second opinion, and focuses mostly on the qualitative sides of the application. So the activities, essays, and more. Applicants who don't meet the academic foundation are often denied pretty swiftly, while those that do have that foundation and happen to meet an institutional priority or 2 or 3 are often given an initial admit or waitlist tag and move on to the next phase. The reading phase usually lasts for a little over a month, And admission officers will read upwards of 70 applications per day until they finish and deplete their entire regional queue, which can be anywhere from 800 applications to 1,000 applications or maybe even more. Step 3 is where the regional admission officer preps files that they've tagged as potential admits and waitlists. Preps, or summaries of each applicant, are essentially the case that admission officers will present in front of their larger colleagues as to why the student should be included. They often mention the important priorities that the student meets, superlative moments in their application, and might include quotes or highlighted sections of their recommendations and their essays that speak to that student's alignment with that college's mission and values. Step 4 is that full committee setting, where the college's admission officers come together, review these preps as they sift through the original file themselves on their laptops, and trim that list of admits even further. The committee will go back to those initial blueprints from their first planning meeting to determine how each individual student will help build that perfect village, and do a series of data-driven projections on what the village would look like with the current composition of students tagged as an admit. Now, the final step, which is often called shaping, involves cutting the admit list even further to get the target number of admits down to a healthy amount. Because even after going through all of those phases, there are typically still too many yeses than the school can accommodate based on their classroom sizes and their residence halls. And in the end, the students who get their fateful acceptance email several months later certainly got that news because of their hard work and perseverance throughout high school and their extraordinary talent in one or many ways. And this is typically written in some way, shape, or form in their acceptance email. But what those students aren't told is the exact rationale behind their decision, that prep, which often has far more to do with a blend of controllable and uncontrollable factors than people may think. So this all brings us to the last and perhaps the most important question. What does all of this information mean for a high school student who's trying to apply to one of these highly selective schools? Let's wrap up this video with 4 action steps that students can take to head in the right direction. Number 1, don't stop being awesome. It's essential to maintain a consistently strong academic performance within a challenging course load based on your high school's offerings throughout your high school career. Ideally, this should also be balanced with a strong list of extracurriculars that focus on depth and not quite as much on breadth. Because again, being that well-rounded student who is diving themselves into every single opportunity at the school isn't necessarily going to help fulfill particular pressing institutional needs for a school. So my advice is to continue pursuing activities that show initiative and measurable impact and are the ones that you find yourself lighting up the most around. Those are going to be the things that the admission officer is most excited to hear about, whether or not they're in alignment with that school's priorities or not. Number 2, start researching. It's never too early to develop a data-driven college list that meets your goals for selectivity while prioritizing the schools where you possibly have a competitive edge from an institutional priority standpoint. So this might look like applying to a college where students from your own home state are more rare in the applicant pool. Number 3, start planning. As you begin to narrow your college list down, it's a good idea to start organizing those schools in some kind of spreadsheet or system and start to make an action plan. This might include whether or not to apply early action or early decision to some schools, considering your standardized testing plans or whether or not you want to submit at certain colleges, testing dates, study schedule, whether or not there are particular merit scholarships or honors programs to apply to each school, recommendation letter needs, and whatever else might be important or influential in your own process. And finally, step number 4, once you have this game plan in action, begin your writing process. You can do this by identifying valued qualities from mission statements, strategic plans at different schools, and these will ideally be qualities that you infuse in some way, shape, or form in those college-specific supplemental essays, or possibly your personal statement. Then, last but not least, head over to the College Essay Guy website for tons of helpful tips, more YouTube videos, podcasts, and strategies to walk you through the entire process, all the way from brainstorming initial ideas to reducing your word count. All right, so to wrap everything up, highly selective schools are not for everyone. And there are tons of great schools outside that list that produce similar success stories. Remember, 75% of colleges on the Common Application have acceptance rates over 50%, and 73% of American college students are enrolled at public institutions, which are often much less selective than some of the schools we've profiled today. If college is a path that you want, it's a path you can take. But if your heart is set on a highly selective school for whatever reason, it would be wise to start building towards that future path as soon as possible. All right, I hope this video was informative, helpful, juicy, all the things. And make sure to like and subscribe to College Essay Guy for more videos like this. Smash that like button. And we hope to see you on the next one. All right, best of luck, friends. We've got you.